Don't give up on our marriage because of one mistake. Luke Abrams parked at his workstation and waited for the Grateful Dead Ripple song to finish before turning off the engine and opening the door. He looked up at the neon sign above the entrance to the building and felt proud when he saw Abrams Manufacturing written above the door. The guard at the door greeted him as Luke made his way to his corner office on the top floor. His CFO had told him that the company was now worth $20 million, and Luke was inundated with offers from firms and venture capitalists who wanted to buy the business. He wasn't interested, though, as he loved his job, his business, and his team of people. He also saw no reason to cash out at this young age. Life was good. His family life had been great all these years. He and Becky, his wife of 14 years, had struggled at first when he started his business, but now they lived very comfortably. Becky worked part-time. She placed most of the blame on him, even though she knew she was fooling herself and felt just as guilty as Chad. She couldn't understand why she'd done it and how stupid it had been to risk everything they had with Luke. Becky gave Luke a week to change his mind, but she couldn't take it anymore and called his cell phone. The number was no longer in service. She called his office to ask about Luke's whereabouts, but was told he wasn't available. This was too much for her. She'd wanted to keep her affair a secret, hoping and assuming that Luke wouldn't want family and friends to know that she'd cheated on him. But now she started calling all of his friends to ask where he was staying and what he was thinking. They all said they had nothing to tell her and that Luke had told them they were clearly not happy about it. It made her realize that Luke had probably told them about the affair, which only added to her shame and sadness. She couldn't get in touch with any of his friends or relatives to find out where he was or how to contact him. 8 weeks after Luke left, a man came to the front door and handed Becky an envelope. She saw that Luke's name was written on the address label and opened it, hoping to get some information. The first thing that fell out when she opened it was the envelope contained his wedding ring, some paperwork and a photograph that had been cut into strips. She picked up the pieces of the photo and saw that it was their wedding portrait that had been put through a shredder. She was upset and cried for several minutes until she was able to open the rest of the contents. The envelope contained legal documents and a letter. She grabbed the letter and started reading. "Becky, I know you wanted to see me and talk to me. We could end your affair. You thought it was just meaningless sex, a mistake, something you should just forget, and that we would go back to how it was before you decided to break our wedding vows and my trust." With each passing year, the memories of his looks, his voice, his spirit and personality, and his loving touch gradually faded from her life. Subscribe to my channel, and thank you. They both sat up and pulled the sheet up. Becky started sobbing uncontrollably, and Chad started telling Luke, "It's really nothing, boss. It's just sex. It's just a distraction for us. It doesn't mean anything. Luke, I love you. It doesn't change how I feel about you, Luke. It was just the last time I saw some wild oats before you and I settled down with kids. Please, Luke, it's okay. Send Chad away. Come and give me a hug, and I'll make it up to you." Luke looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Becky, I don't think that means anything. I think you've shown that our marriage doesn't matter to you. You've shown that you don't respect me. I was a fool to believe that you loved me. How can you say you love me when you've been having sex with Chad in my bed for months? I can't even look at you. I will never touch you again. That's for sure. Now just sit there and shut up." Luke practically idolized her and treated her with love and respect. His response cut straight to the soul with those words. She worked as a marketing consultant and often worked from home. She was tall, 5 feet 8 inches, with fiery red hair and an incredible body. Her breasts and ass were perfect, and she had bonus legs that stretched for miles. Their sex life was really good, although Luke had noticed a definite decrease over the last 6 months, from 3 to 4 times a week to just once a week. Becky also seemed to be more attached to her phone, sending messages to God knows who. One day when he picked it up to check match results, he noticed that it was now password protected, which hadn't been the case in the past. They talked about sex and how she'd become more reserved and quiet in their interactions. She said she felt older and more tired, and he should just know that she loved him more than he ever imagined. They also talked about kids. She didn't want any yet, but he told her how important it was to him. She said she'd stop taking the birth control pill in 6 months. Becky eventually called Luke's parents to see if he was staying with them, but when they picked up the phone and she introduced herself and said hello, they hung up. She called again, but they switched to voicemail. She went to Luke's company and talked security into letting her into the lobby. She then called Brenda, who approached Becky, and she was pretty upset and asked him to come downstairs and talk to her. She said he should respect her enough to talk to her and let her explain. Maybe he should think about what he did. Luke doesn't work here anymore. He sold the company and moved out of the area. He's made it clear that he's not giving you any information about his current status. Please leave now, or I'll have security escort you off the premises. Becky rushed home, confused and upset. She'd sold the company, and he'd never do that. He'd left the neighborhood. Why wouldn't he talk to her? She sat down to her email and tried to write him a long letter of apology. Once more, she believed that Luke would forgive her, and that she could quickly make amends for her actions as a loving and caring wife and mother. However, she now realized that she had been deceiving herself. She had fooled herself into thinking that she deserved this, and that it would make her a better wife. She saw how much pain and disrespect she had poured out on the man she loved and wanted to have children with. She wanted a long and happy life with him. She thought, oh my God, have I ruined everything? How am I going to get through this? All she could do was look at Luke and say, please, Luke, I'm sorry for hurting you. I didn't think much about what I was doing. I didn't realize it would be so bad. I never meant to disrespect you. I never wanted to hurt you like this. Luke picked up his phone and scrolled through the part of the video where she was screaming, yes, Chad, no one interests me like you do. How could you think you weren't disrespecting me by making comments like that and having sex with someone in my own bed? You disgust me. Luke looked. I was surprised that you thought you could just pick up where we left off after you broke our wedding vows and my trust. I know you never loved me the way I loved you. You didn't seem to realize how much you hurt me. I'd never been hurt like that before, and it was just too much to forgive. I could never trust you again, never be able to touch you or make love to you again. Maybe you don't remember what happened, or maybe it wasn't important to you. If so, I've attached a video of you and Chad. Your words alone are enough to break my heart every time I think of them. I remember the calls I initially received from our close friends and family about how I could leave you, and why I was so cruel to disappear from your life. It is clear to me that you never took responsibility for your actions. I'm sorry. I sent the same video with another letter to show how badly you'd betrayed me and that there was nothing I could do about it. I was so upset and hurt by you that I decided to get revenge. At that point, Chad said there was no way to save his job. He told him not to bother coming in the next day because he was fired. Then he told him to get out of his house. Chad started to get up, and so did Becky. But Luke yelled at her, "Stay there in those dirty sheets, cheater, and don't move." She squirmed. In bed, she saw the hurt and resentment on Luke's face replaced with anger and pure hatred. What have I done to hurt such a good man and turn his love for me into hate? Chad grabbed his clothes, ran down the stairs, jumped out the door, and sped off in his car. Luke looked at Becky and started crying. She got out of bed and tried to go over to him and hug him, but he looked at her in disgust, turned away and held up the knife to keep her away from him. She burst into tears and ran to the bathroom, locked the door, turned on the shower and sank to the floor. She hoped that maybe, if she gave Luke space, he would calm down and they could talk. It was her only hope. I'm not happy with what I did, but I think it was the only way forward. I've decided that from now on, you'll never hear from me again. You'll never see me, and I'll never return to our hometown or even our state. I'll never understand why you did it, or what drove you to do it. I hope you figure it out before you have another serious relationship, and I hope you remember. I hope that, before you cheat on someone again, you can understand the pain, humiliation, and disrespect you caused me. I hope that, one day, I can get over it and remember the good times we had. I hope that, instead of feeling hatred, I can feel indifference or at least understanding. You might be able to find forgiveness or understanding, however that may be. You might not care, but I'll never know, and that's what I'll live with. The last set of papers in the envelope were titled, Dissolution of Marriage, but at this point, Becky saw nothing through her tears and collapsed to the floor. It had been 5 years. We both felt guilty about doing this to you and my family. Becky knows you want to have kids and she's going off the pill, so we decided that was it, and we're going to be good spouses again. I'm really sorry, Luke. Looking back, I knew it was wrong, and now I've ruined my marriage and possibly yours and my career. If you can't forgive us, Becky said to Luke. I was so caught up in the mystery. There was nothing wrong with you, Luke. I love you. I've never loved anyone but you. I want your children and to grow old with you. You treated me like a queen. Sex with Chad was fun, but it was nothing compared to loving you. Don't abandon me and our marriage for a mistake. It meant nothing. Do you even know me? How can you think that letting another man be intimate with you means nothing to our marriage? Do you think I could ever get past the pain of being lied to and move past the lies to ever trust you again? How could you think I would? Have you ever wanted to touch your cheating body again? Luke realized that the conference in Denver was happening in 2 weeks, which meant that it coincided with the sales conference that Chad would be attending in Denver that same weekend. He was really disappointed. He pulled out his phone and turned on the video, slowly peering out from behind the door. Becky was there too. Luke was now riding his friend and employee Chad, who was riding him like a bucking horse. Luke burst into the room, shooting the phone in one hand and a knife in the other. He grabbed Becky by the hair, ripped her away from Chad, turned her around and pushed her onto the bed. She screamed and saw it was Luke. Her eyes widened, her mouth fell open and she wailed, "Luke, this doesn't mean anything at that moment." She tried to get up and walk over to him, and Chad tried to move to the edge of the bed and stand up. But Luke held out the knife and yelled, "Both of you sit on the bed and shut up, or you will find a 12-gauge shotgun pointed at your heads, in a blade in your chest. I don't think I could have the same spark, the same connection, and the same love that I had for you after you insulted me like that. Don't you see how this has already put a strain on our marriage? There's a lack of conversation and communication, and it's turned into just mechanical sex. One drunken night out may be a mistake, but planning and holding meetings at out-of-town conventions and at our house is a bad thing. It's not just a mistake, Becky." She'd convinced herself it was meaningless sex and wouldn't hurt their relationship, maybe even make it stronger. But when Luke spoke, she realized she'd emotionally and physically distanced herself from him. She didn't understand why, since she loved and wanted only him. Maybe it was the guilt she was trying to bury that was eating away at their relationship. She thought her affair would never come to light. Luke trusted her so much, she saw that trust would never be the same. He noticed that he had an older version and remembered that he had worked on it over the weekend and saved the files on his home computer instead of uploading them to the company server. He thought he'd ask Becky to email the file instead of driving home. He tried calling the home line, but the phone switched to voicemail. He tried Becky's cell phone, but it was off, which he thought was odd considering she had a workday. Oh well, that was okay. He'd make it home in 20 minutes. A few minutes later, Luke was enjoying the weather and some great tunes on NPR when he turned down his block and pulled up in front of his house. He spotted a car in the driveway that looked familiar, and it didn't take him long to realize it was his friend Chad's Lexus. He parked on the street and walked up the driveway. He quietly opened the front door and walked into the house. The first floor was quiet, no lights or radio on. Becky wasn't in the study at the desk. Luke made a quick call, looked at Chad and said, "Janie, it's Luke. I'm sending you a video of Chad making love to my wife, Becky, in my bed. I don't know if you knew he was abusing you and the kids. I'm just sorry to have to tell you this." Luke was quiet for a few minutes before hanging up the phone. He then said to Chad, "She tells you not to worry about coming home. This isn't the first time. You've already betrayed your life and your children. Now you're betraying your friend and your boss, and you're ruining 2 marriages. You're worthless. I'll give you one chance to save your job. Tell me exactly when it started, and how many times you two made love." Luke said, "Don't make us go over it. It doesn't matter, it doesn't mean anything, and it stops right now." His look of hatred and pain made her pull back even harder and huddle into the headboard of the bed, averting her eyes. She continued to cry and sob as Chad spoke. "Luke, please don't let this ruin our friendship." He walked to the kitchen and then heard moans and voices coming from the master bedroom. He couldn't believe what he already knew in his gut. Someone was making he was in bed with his wife, asleep. He grabbed a long Wurf knife from the shelf and slowly walked up the stairs. He stood in the hallway, hidden by the door jamb, but he could hear what they were talking about. They were hugging and talking, and he heard Becky say, "Chad, we can do this. I think Luke is starting to wonder why I'm always on my phone and why I don't make love to him more often. I only have sex with him once a week because I feel guilty and it feels wrong. Then the next day I've really enjoyed our little affair. It's been 4 months since I've been on the pill. I've been wanting to have sex with you, but I don't want to get pregnant. So I want you to make love to me because this will be the last time. Then I'm going to the Denver conference, and then we're done." Luke remembered that Becky had told him that she was going to a marketing conference. She cried and washed for half an hour. After washing her face, toweling herself dry and putting on a robe, she quietly opened the bathroom door. She was afraid of another angry scream from Luke and knew she deserved it, but the room was quiet. She looked out into the hallway and saw that the house seemed quiet. "Luke, I'll make up a spare bedroom for you and stay away from you for as long as you want until you calm down enough to let me talk to you. Explain my actions, and apologize. She heard no reply. She saw that the dresser drawers were open and empty, and most of the clothes in his closet were gone. 2 large suitcases from the closet were gone. Then she turned around and saw a 12-inch butcher knife stuck up to the hilt into the pillow and mattress. She saw a butcher's knife stuck up to the hilt in the pillow and mattress. Luke was gone. She hoped he was safe and hadn't hurt himself. She expected he'd call her in a day or two, since Luke had disappeared, and just as the letter had said, Becky hadn't heard a thing from anyone about his health, his spirit, or his whereabouts. She hadn't heard anything at all about his life. Luke was very generous in the divorce decree, offering her $1 million, a house, and property in lieu of any ongoing financial support. Her attorney told her that this was the best she could get. It was the best she could get, given that the $22 million Luke made from selling the company wasn't kept in the U.S. and couldn't be used for legal compensation. Becky didn't think she deserved anything and wouldn't fight what Luke thought was fair. At first, her life was very difficult, as friends and family, when she saw the video of her having sex with Chad in her marital bed. She realized how much she had hurt Luke and how she had caused him pain by sending the video. She also realized that it was a way to prevent anyone from asking about what had happened and whether they could be together again. When she sent it, she sent emails to both his personal and work addresses, but they bounced back as invalid. She called his parents again, but they'd blocked her number. She went back to the spare bedroom and collapsed on the bed for the next 4 weeks. Becky lived like a zombie. She heard nothing about Luke, not a word about where he was or how she was trying to cope with their marriage. She hired a private detective firm, and they sent her a report with limited information. They told her that Luke had sold his company. The exact price wasn't made public, but it was estimated to be more than $20 million. They told her that he had closed all of Becky's and Becky's joint accounts and credit cards, canceled his phone, internet, and email, sold all of his valuables, and apparently left town. They also said that he had paid off the mortgage on the house and put the bill of sale in her name. They were unable to get any of his friends or co-workers to tell them anything about his whereabouts or how to contact him. I promise I'll be the best wife and mother you could ever hope for. Please come to me or call me. I need you. Please talk to me. There was no response from Luke that day or the next. On the 3rd day, she called his administrator, Brenda, at the office. Brenda was very close to Luke. In fact, she idolized him. Luke had told her about what had happened between Chad and Becky. Brenda returned Becky's call and explicitly informed her. She was told that Luke was busy and not to call him directly, that he'd be happy to be left alone until he was ready. Becky assumed she meant Luke was willing to talk, but it turned out that wasn't what she'd said. At this point, Becky assumed that Luke needed time. She called Chad and found out that he'd been fired from his job. She also heard that Chad's wife had kicked him out, and he'd moved back in with his parents. He hinted that he wanted to come over and talk. Becky told Chad that she didn't want to talk to him again, and that he should back off. She went into the spare bedroom, threw herself on the bed, and curled up in a fetal position to cry. Luke went to his office and spent a very restless night on the couch in the adjoining conference room. He let HR and security know that Chad was terminated later that morning. Chad did show up on site, assuming Luke had cooled off, but security took his badge, walked him to his car, and told him that if he showed up again, the police would be called. Luke spent a couple of hours alone at his desk, thinking about what to do next. He realized that despite still loving Becky, their marriage was over. He'd never be able to feel the same spark of joy, trust, and deep union with her as he had before. The marriage had failed. Pride, resentment, anger, jealousy. It didn't matter what to call it. She was no longer his life partner. Having children was out of the question. It was over. Luke called his CFO, and they spent 4 hours discussing the value of the company and what Luke had decided to do. The CFO was shocked when Luke told him about Chad and Becky. He begged him not to do anything rash, to let his anger and pain subside for a few weeks, and then decide what he wanted to do. But Luke had already made his decision. When Becky woke up in the morning, she saw the pain and hurt on Luke's face, and it hit her hard. She thought, oh my God, how could I have been so stupid? Some mediocre sex with someone I barely like, much less have no love for, may have ruined it all. My marriage to the only man I truly love, what is wrong with me? She was determined to fix it, to get Luke back, to get them both back to the way they were before she'd been stupid enough to have an affair. She was sure that Luke loved her so much that he would never leave her. She couldn't resist calling his cell phone, but it immediately went to voicemail, so she left him a message. Luke, I'm so sorry. I love you so much, and I know I hurt you. I'm so ashamed, but Luke, You love me and I love you, and I'll get through this. I'll do whatever you want me to do to make it go away. I've got a good reputation at work, and I don't want that to suffer. Becky and I were just caught up in a moment of weakness. We've only been on 4 dates. The first time we met was at a conference in Denver. I called her the first night and asked her out. We had dinner, drinks, and danced. We really hit it off, so we went out again the next night. I went up to my room and we had sex. Then, about a month later, Becky called me and said you were going to be out of town for the day visiting a new construction site and asked me to come over. We ended up having sex in your room, and she seemed to enjoy it in your marriage bed. 3 weeks later, we got a room at the Hilton Hotel, met for lunch at noon, and had sex there. Now she's called me and asked me to get sick, come over, and have sex with her because she's incredibly horny. We're going to meet at the next conference in Denver next month. This was the last time we spent 3 nights together trying to consummate it. She felt extremely guilty. She was really humiliated, embarrassed, and hurt that friends and family had seen it. But she realized that it wasn't as bad as what she had done to Luke. She lived with her shame, and at her parents' insistence, decided to see a therapist to work on her grief and depression and try to turn her life around. She had a few dates, but she never seemed to enjoy them. She kept her own counsel and didn't let anyone in on her private thoughts and pain, so nothing ever progressed beyond a few painfully awkward encounters. There were a few nights where she tried to find solace in sex, but they were so awkward, so humiliating, and served as such a grim reminder of what had once been, and how she had sunk to that point that she couldn't face having meaningless sex anymore. When Luke left, he took away the photo albums, so she was left with no pictures of them together. She wasn't as excited about it as he was, but he thought she was thrilled with the idea. Luke was thinking about it in his office when his friend and VP of sales, Chad Warwick, walked in. Chad had been friends with him since college. They'd played soccer and hockey together in high school, but they weren't close. They'd played soccer and hockey together at college, and although they weren't best friends, Luke considered him close. Now, the relationship was a mixture of friendship, and Luke was the boss. He treated his employees as partners, but ultimately decided what they should do. Chad peeked through the door and said, "Boss, I'm not feeling well today. I think I have the flu or something, so if you don't mind, I'm going home to bed. I'll be back either later or tomorrow. I'm done with the proposal for the new climate control systems. I'll see you tomorrow." "Okay, Chad, hang in there and hope you feel better." Luke decided to work more on the new business line he was going to create and opened his workstation to pull up the files.